Beautifully situated on an island between Upper and Lower Lough Erne in Northern Ireland is the ancient city of Enniskillen, the charter of which dates back to 1612, in the tragic days of King James I, whose soldiers were rebuffed by the courageous people of Enniskillen. This old castle of the Maguires played an important part in the defense of the town, and it stands today as one of the most historic shrines in the province of Ulster. Ulster, by the way, has a liberal form of self-government, but it is closely linked with Great Britain in the fiscal union known as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The round towers in the old castles may have originated from the individual round towers that are still to be seen throughout all of Ireland, characteristic landmarks dating back to prehistoric times. The Cathedral of Downpatrick in County Down stands on one of the sites on which St. Patrick once preached, and our Irish guide informed us that this is one of the places where St. Patrick is buried. Regardless of where it is, the fact remains that the patron saint of Ireland and his followers were vital factors in the education of the Irish race, spreading knowledge and appreciation for architecture and beauty at a time when most of what is now called the civilized world was in the primitive shadow of ignorance. Historians have not yet solved the origin of Irish crosses, but here is an excellent example of a reconstructed cross marked by reverence and artistic imagination. The peat industry, which thrives principally in the rural districts of Ireland, is one of unusual interest. Incidentally, what is known to us as peat is referred to in Ireland as turf. This turf acts as a good substitute for coal and wood, for Ireland has no coal mines and very little woodland. Chiefly because of this, the poorer classes who cannot afford to buy imported coal are obliged to use turf for their fuel. This turf, when properly dried and burned, gives off an intense heat and very little smoke. Tons of it are carted in from the bogs and shipped to various little ports along the seacoast of Ireland. After removing an upper layer of soil, the turf is dug with an oddly shaped implement called a shame. Scientists claim that this turf accumulates on the surface of the earth at the rate of 1 foot per 1,000 years. At the end of the day, we pause for a night's lodging at Port Rush, a popular summer resort in County Antrim, not far from which stands the famous old castle of Dunluce, now in the fascinating glow of twilight. No doubt in days of old, when nights were bold and Dunluce was new, romantic eyes looked out upon the sea and dreamed as we dream now. But upon viewing this old landmark in daylight, our sentimental thoughts of the previous evening are shattered by a few historic facts, one of which concerned a terrible storm in 1639, when part of the castle was blown into the sea. Continuing our journey, we visit old County Down, which is noted for its rolling green hills and mountains, varying panoramas of pastoral beauty. Ireland is swept by westerly winds, which bring a great deal of rain during the season, from the middle of July through September, and from December to the middle of May. The downpour is not torrential, but steady, and most of the time the people do not appear to be aware that it is raining, probably because they are born in it and consider it a natural condition. Here, where the mountains of Mourne sweep down to the sea, we behold the Irish landscape at its best, and we find it easier to understand the inspiration that has moved so many of the bards of Ireland to immortalize the beauty of their country in poetry and song. On the seafront of County Down stands the town of Bangor, another popular summer resort, formerly the seat of a monastery which did much to spread culture throughout the British Isles. Peacefully snuggled in a cove on the coast of County Antrim is the little village of Cushenden, noted for its excellent stream and deep-sea fishing. The coast of Antrim faces the North Channel, where commercial fleets find their choice catches of deep-sea fish. This rocky promontory is Carrick a Reed, or the Rock in the Road, so called because it intercepts salmon moving round the coast. A unique attraction in this region is the Carrick a Reed swinging bridge, formed of planks laid two abreast and tied to ropes, a single rope serving as a handrail. And now we come to the most famous natural wonder in Ireland, the Giant's Causeway, every section and subsection of which bears some fanciful name bestowed by the fisher folk for identification purposes, long before this natural phenomenon began to attract the modern tourist. The group of massive basaltic columns on the face of the cliffs are known as the Giant's Organ, which, according to our Irish guide, plays once in 7 years, and then only 2 tunes. Geologists say these stone blocks were formed during some long past subterranean disturbance, during which hot lava rose to the surface and on cooling took these curious shapes. But Irish tradition gives another explanation. The Scottish giant, so the legend goes, threatened Finn McCall, an Irish warrior, with a beating, but he wouldn't come to Ireland because he was afraid to swim the channel. Whereupon Finn built a stony highway across the sea to the shores of Scotland, thereby enabling the giant to cross on foot, after which he was badly defeated by Finn McCall. That's the Irish of it, but we have yet to hear the Scottish version. These slabs, remnants of that legendary road, are 15 to 20 inches in diameter. A similar formation exists on the Scottish shore, almost directly opposite, resembling the ruins of a roadway built by Titans, using these enormous paving stones. Aside from the fascinating yarns of folklore, it is certain that the Giant's Causeway is a natural amphitheater, frescoed and emblazoned by the wondrous powers of creation, in the midst of which we mortals stand in awe. Verily, there are more things in heaven and earth than we have dreamed of in our philosophy, and we can only hope that time and tide may someday reveal the grand mysteries of creation. And this is the thought that we take with us as we say farewell to the Giant's Causeway. We are sailing into the historic old harbor of Liverpool, a vital gateway to Great Britain and one of the world's most important ports of call, with over 30 miles of quayage, embracing a colossal system of shipping, which begins here and extends itself to the most distant reaches of international trade. Liverpool was originally a fishing village with its history dating back to 1207, when King John made it a borough to serve as a point of departure for Ireland. A lucrative slave trade started in 1709. Ships sailed first to Africa, where they shipped the slaves, then to the West Indies, where the slaves were sold, and the proceeds brought home in cargoes of sugar and rum. This trade continued until its abolition in 1807. Another branch of maritime enterprise which attracted the attention of the merchants of Liverpool was privateering, which during the latter half of the 18th century was a profitable investment. Some of the early expeditions proved so successful that almost the whole community rushed into privateering, with results of a very checkered character. Although the city itself was heavily bombed during the recent war, comparatively little damage was done to the all-important docks. Motoring from Liverpool to Stratford-on-Avon, we passed through many places of interest, including the old town of Chester, with its unique main street, one of the oldest public thoroughfares in the British Isles, along which the Roman invaders drove their chariots almost 2,000 years ago. On either side of this quaint street are the famous rows, which consist of arcades permitting continuous undercover passage from store to store, where one may purchase most of his household requirements. A convenient arrangement, especially on a stormy day. Again, en route to Stratford-on-Avon, we pass through the ancient city of Coventry, which probably received the worst blitzing of any place in the British Isles during the recent war. As a matter of fact, the material destruction was so bad and the human suffering so horrible that the enemy coined the word Coventrate, which was used by them thereafter whenever they gave orders to bomb a place completely. The history of this old city is replete with stirring incidents, one of the best known of which is the story of Lady Godiva, immortalized in the poem by Tennyson. For 3 long months, the enemy bombed the city of Coventry, which has been recognized as the headquarters for the English motor car and cycle industries since 1870. But despite the complete blitzing of over 50% of its buildings and machinery, the Daimler Works, with the help of the courageous people of Coventry, carried on, becoming a symbol of British industry that succeeded in achieving its full quota of wartime production. Here is a horrible example of how completely one of the Daimler factories was demolished by enemy bombs. It is difficult for us who have never experienced a wartime blitz to understand the terrible forces of destruction that are let loose, tossing ton-weight objects about like feathers. For example, this huge motor fan, weighing over 1,000 pounds, was blown from a window 100 yards away, and it has been quietly turning in the breeze ever since. After witnessing only a minute portion of the awful results of modern warfare, as it has developed to date, we shudder at the very thought of another war. Verily, it would most certainly be the last one, for wars are fought by men, and if we can believe what we read about the potentialities of atomic destruction, it would mean the end of mankind on this earth. Whether we choose to destroy one another or endeavor to rebuild our world into something better is the momentous issue before us. And we feel that if it were left to the war-shocked people of Coventry to decide this diabolical question, never again would the horrors of war blacken the face of our good earth. In the outskirts of Coventry, we pass a unique monument, which is famous not for beauty of design, but for the fact that it has been erected here in the very center of the British Isles in honor of the cyclists of the world. Another famous monument along our route is the one at Banbury, which figures in the English nursery rhyme, "Ride a cock horse to Banbury Cross to see a fine lady upon a white horse. Rings on her fingers and bells on her toes. She shall have music wherever she goes." The original cross which once stood here was destroyed during the 17th century by zealous Puritans, but was replaced by this one in 1858. A few miles from here is the historic town of Warwick, with its magnificent castle, aptly described by Sir Walter Scott as the fairest monument of ancient and chivalrous splendor, which yet remains uninjured by time. The embattled walls and towers are noble examples of 14th century fortification. And now we've arrived at our destination, the town of Stratford-on-Avon, birthplace of England's most famous poet and dramatist, William Shakespeare. Although Stratford-on-Avon owes its chief interest to the reflected glory of its celebrated son, it was a place of some prominence long before the birth of Shakespeare. And among its ancient landmarks is this so-called Harvard House, which was the home of the mother of John Harvard, benefactor of Harvard University. Wherever we go in Stratford, there is a monument or a landmark to remind us of the Bard of Avon. And the greatest living tribute to his memory is the Shakespeare Memorial Theater, wherein his plays are reenacted from year to year. The birthplace of William Shakespeare is visited annually by thousands of visitors from all parts of the world. And it is now used as a museum, housing one of the greatest collections of Shakespearean items. It was here that Shakespeare spent his boyhood years, until his father lost most of his worldly goods and was obliged to apprentice his brilliant son to a local trade. Not far from here stands the thatched roof cottage wherein young Will Shakespeare courted Anne Hathaway, the girl that he married in his 18th year. It was an unfortunate marriage, but the world remembers William Shakespeare not by how he lived so much as by what he created and handed down to posterity. And this is the thought that we take with us as we say farewell to the land of Shakespeare. We are now in that part of Old England known as the Cotswold Hills District, a charming region unspoiled by modern innovations and ideal for those who are content to abandon the confusion of a modern world and travel for a few moments at least in a well-ordered realm of peace and rest. An outstanding attraction in this picturesque region is its architecture in stone, which is characteristically illustrated in this unique reproduction of a Cotswold village. Although it is only a miniature in which our modern Alice in Wonderland appears to be an Amazon, it is a compact example of a style of architecture that has become world famous. Aside from the construction of buildings, the stone, which is quarried in the Cotswold Hills, is also used for the formation of walls that are built in a manner typical of this section. The stone, when first quarried, is of a deep cream color, weathering to a gray and turning to other rich shades when sunshine strikes the flaked edges. The art of constructing a Cotswold wall is a heritage among the craftsmen in this part of the world. No mortar is used except in the top layer of the higher walls, and it appears to be all that is necessary to keep the walls intact for generations. Cotswold cottages seem to blend into the landscape as if they were placed thereon by Mother Nature herself, along with the trees and flowers that adorn them. Characteristic features of older Cotswold cottages are the stone-gabled roofs and the picturesque chimney stacks. The planning is on the simplest lines with single-span roofs. There are no outbuildings or fanciful embellishments, but throughout there is perfect proportion and the mark of skilled craftsmanship. These houses of the traditional Cotswold type date from 1580 to the closing years of the 17th century, when great merchants prospered and in pious gratitude built many churches, which now stand in silent tribute to their memory. En route to the valley of the Wye River, we pass picturesque flocks of sheep pasturing on the wolds or rolling plains. A unique feature of the smaller farms in this section are the tree hedges which separate one from another. One of the most thrilling scenes in all of England is this view of the Wye Valley. For a distance of 130 miles from its source to its estuary, the Wye River winds like a ribbon of silver. And in this particular section, known as the Lower Wye, it provides a delightful means of outdoor recreation for visitors from all over the British Isles. The people who seek rest and recreation in this peaceful region are typical of a vanishing breed of humanity that appears to be content with the simpler diversions of a quiet holiday. Motorboats are practically unheard of here, where all boat transportation is controlled by manpower. And speaking of manpower, here's a good example of what we mean. Boating trips are unusually popular, as many places of scenic beauty and historic interest are visited along the way, such as the old Monmouth Bridge with its 13th century gateway, a unique example of a fortified entrance actually standing on a bridge. Old castles in the British Isles are so numerous and we become so accustomed to seeing them that we take them more or less for granted, until now and then an unusually interesting one looms across our path and impresses us with its ancient grandeur. This is Chepstow Castle, built by Edward I in the 13th century. It has been the scene of much bitter fighting, particularly during the Civil Wars, when it was captured and lost by both royalists and parliamentarians. Vying with the old castles are the ancient abbeys, which lie scattered throughout all of Great Britain, some in good preservation and others in ruins, a fine example of which is Tintern Abbey, founded here over 800 years ago. The church, which was built in 1287, has long been roofless, yet enough of it remains to make it an object of pilgrimage. In contrast with the picturesque ruins of this historic shrine is Laycock Abbey in a perfect state of preservation, although its founding dates back to the early part of the 13th century. It was from one of these windows in the year of 1839 that William Henry Talbot, or Talbot, the accredited inventor of photography, took his first pictures. Laycock Abbey and its adjoining buildings form an interesting succession of architectural styles, outstanding among which is the Elizabethan courtyard. It was in the stables of this courtyard that Queen Elizabeth had her horses quartered during her many visits to Laycock Abbey. Although this historic shrine abounds in tales of historic significance, the outstanding feature of interest to us is the fact that the inventor of photography conducted his experiments here and finally gave to the world the first photograph that was the forerunner of modern photography. We are naturally thrilled at the thought of being invited to have tea in this historic shrine, which in the 7 centuries of its existence has never been unoccupied and has always upheld the tradition of hospitality. And it is here that we conclude our glimpses of Old England. From New York, the former Amsterdam of the New World, we are traveling by airplane to the original Amsterdam of the Old World, and we are now within sight of our destination. Below us, we see the so-called polders, or islands of land, which have been reclaimed from the sea by the industrious Dutch. And there before us is the famous Schiphol Airport, headquarters of the Royal Dutch Airlines, whose planes are appropriately called the Flying Dutchman, in memory of the fast merchant ships that once achieved supremacy on the sea and helped to make Old Amsterdam the greatest mercantile city in Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries. Thanks to the speed of modern air travel, we have flown about 3,500 miles in less than 18 hours. And we are now motoring into the very center of Amsterdam, where the Central Railway Station engages our attention. Like many of the city's buildings, it is constructed on an artificial island. As a matter of fact, the whole city of Amsterdam might be called a child of the sea, for it is founded largely upon land that was lifted from under the sea and molded into the service of mankind. This reclaimed land naturally created a network of islands surrounded by canals, necessitating a constant flow of boat traffic from one island to another. Flowing like a main street through the heart of Amsterdam is the River Amstel, and this famous waterway with all its canal-like offshoots also affords an ideal means of tourist travel in and around the grand old town. The natural soil of Holland is composed of loam and loose sand, and consequently Dutch cities have been constructed on substantial artificial pilework driven deep into the firmer sand beneath. The picturesque old buildings which line the banks of the waterways reflect the patience and tenacity and the power and richness of a race that has spent 2,000 years in a constant struggle with the forces of nature to wrest a great and flourishing land from the sea. As the canals provide the chief means of local transportation, Amsterdam is naturally dotted with interesting old bridges, and this one in particular holds our interest. The unusual manner in which the attendant collects his toll charge from river vessels is a custom that dates back through the centuries. The collector stands like a fisherman dangling a pole to the passing boats, and instead of fish, he collects a toll charge in a tiny basket at the end of his line. This old drawbridge, operated entirely by manpower, is practically a family heirloom, for the job of attending it is handed down from generation to generation of the same family. And so goes the local traffic of the day, back and forth from island to island, while we continue our tour along the waterways, where boats of commerce now mingle with pleasure craft. We are passing a section that was once inhabited by wealthy Dutch merchantmen, but now their former homes have become offices, granaries, manufacturing plants, and warehouses. The land which the Dutchmen struggle so ferociously to gain and work so diligently to keep is rich and fertile and yields fine grains and other important food commodities, which are brought to Amsterdam for milling, packing, and distribution. While the city's unique system of canals is of the utmost importance in time of peace, it is also of great strategic value in time of war, for the whole system of sluices and canals is so organized that Amsterdam could be practically inundated in a matter of hours, leaving nothing to the conquering enemy but the sea from whence the old town was originally created. The canals run in circles around the city, and their banks are invariably planted with elms, providing a picturesque framework for interesting old landmarks along the way, including the Oude Kerk Tower, which dates from the 15th century. Rembrandt Park was set aside in honor of one of Holland's most famous sons, Rembrandt van Rijn, perhaps the greatest painter and etcher that the world has ever known. Born in Leiden on July 15, 1606, the son of a well-to-do miller, Rembrandt began painting while still in his youth, and by the time he had reached the age of 25, his work had already attracted the attention of art lovers in the old city of Amsterdam. At the age of 50, however, Rembrandt became bankrupt, and from then until his death 13 years later, troubles surrounded him. He had outlived his popularity, and his manner of painting was no longer in favor with a people who preferred the smooth trivialities of his more popular contemporaries. Many of his original paintings are contained in the Rijksmuseum, including what has been regarded by many art critics as his masterpiece, the Staalmeesters, which is a representation of the syndics of the Guild of the Clothmakers, or literally stamp masters. In the prevailing hues of the picture and the absence of strong light, the master has succeeded in producing what may be termed as usual poetry of form, combined with the most lifelike fidelity. As a painter, he worked for light and shade rather than color, and his style was not influenced by any one particular school, but was formulated by his own thoughts and observations of the world in which he lived. There are many other famous original paintings by old Dutch masters in the Rijksmuseum, outstanding among which is the Merry Drinker, or the Jovial Toper, by the world-renowned Frans Hals. Among the many other interesting articles to be seen here are these colorful examples of the world-famous Delftware. Delftware originated in Delft, Holland, in the 16th century. It was a bold attempt to imitate the costly porcelains brought from the Far East by the old Dutch navigators. At first, the famous blue color known as Delft blue was used exclusively, and although other colors have since been added, Delft blue is still the prevailing color. England began to manufacture Delftware in the early part of the 17th century, and today it vies with Holland as the important center of manufacture. The housewives of Amsterdam vie with one another in their collections of exquisite pieces of china and porcelain, some of which were brought to Holland by the East India merchantmen and have since been handed down from generation to generation. In a private residence, it is our privilege to photograph an original portrait of a beautiful young lady who is an ancestor of the man who now directs our attention to her. As lay critics of art, we regard this remote and unsung portrait as one of the most beautiful that we have ever seen. Although the old Dutch masters have contributed much to the art and culture of mankind, we cannot conclude our glimpses of Amsterdam without a word of praise for the industrious Dutch artisans who built a great city on reclaimed land from the sea. And it is with this thought that we say farewell to old Amsterdam. This is the fair city of Perth, former capital of Scotland and the site of many historical events in which the fate of the country was involved. Perth was one of the first places in Scotland where John Knox, the fiery religious leader, openly declared and executed the doctrines which resulted in the formation of the various Protestant churches. The prolific pen of Sir Walter Scott has done much to perpetuate this historic capital of ancient Scotland in his story of the Fair Maid of Perth, who was the daughter of Simon, a poor but proud glover. She was so beautiful that men of all ranks courted her affection, and much blood was shed among them, a pitched battle having been fought in this very street before she finally consented to marry a suitor of lowly estate. This old stone house in which the fair maid is said to have lived is now an attraction for tourists. At the time of our visit, we had the pleasure of being escorted by a sergeant of the local police force who spoke with a Scottish accent so thick that we had difficulty in understanding him. Much to our surprise, we learned that this stalwart Scotsman was born in St. Louis, Missouri. He left the United States at an early age and wandered back to the land of his ancestors. He told us that the best friend he had left in the world was his dog. It's Sunday morning, and there are many fair maids in Perth, including this bevy of military pulchritude, marching not to battle, but to church. Marching is a traditional pastime in Perth, and nothing rouses the spirit of the people more than the skirl of bagpipes on parade. The bagpipe very early identified itself with the life of the Scottish people and became a military instrument, which they have always held in great esteem. In days of yore, the thrilling notes of the bagpipes called the clans together and instilled in every loyal Scotsman something of that rugged and indomitable spirit that has made him a credit to his country wherever he goes. From Perth, it is a distance of about 100 miles to Inverness, another historical city which once had the distinction of being the capital of the Pictish kingdom, extending over all of northern Scotland. Its comparatively modern castle of today now stands on the site of its predecessor, around which centered much of the history of ancient Scotia. Not far from Inverness is Loch Ness, the largest and most northerly lake in the great glen of northern Scotland. It has a maximum depth of 700 feet, and it has never been known to freeze. This picturesque body of water received considerable publicity a few years ago as the abode of a prehistoric animal known as the Loch Ness Monster. And now we come to the most hallowed ground in all of Scotland, upon which the Battle of Culloden was fought between the Highland clans and the English soldiers headed by the Duke of Cumberland. According to this crude monument's inscription, the Battle of Culloden was fought on this moor, 16th of April, 1746. The graves of the gallant Highlanders who fought for Scotland and Prince Charlie are marked by the names of their clans. In some instances, several clans got mixed in the confusion of battle, and this accounts for the graves marked mixed clans. Although time has long since healed the wounds and bridged the breach that once existed between England and Scotland, they who fought and died here will long be remembered for their valor. At Glen Coe, we pause to admire one of the most beautiful bodies of water in the British Isles. En route to St. Andrews, we pass acres of wildflowers, the most conspicuous of which is the famous heather, a prolific flower that has identified itself with Scotland in song and story for centuries. Among the world's most interesting animals are Highland cattle, a shaggy breed that is noted for its hardiness and capacity to stand winter exposure. We were told that these cattle do not thrive away from their native heaths, and although a few of them have been exported to America, they could not adapt themselves to changed conditions and soon died. This old fellow's horns have a spread of over 5 feet from point to point. Many of the large estates which were in the hands of the old Scottish hereditary families have been broken up in recent years, but here and there, lairds of the land may still be seen in their Highland attire, which lends color and atmosphere to the countryside. Continuing our journey, we pass through locales that abound in settings like this. On a rocky promontory jutting into the North Sea is St. Andrews, the ancient ecclesiastical capital of Scotland, a fashionable summer resort and the official headquarters of the game of golf. The Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St. Andrews, founded in 1754, is the premier golf club in the world and is the ruling authority on the game. We salute the flag of St. Andrew in the name of the Royal and Ancient Game, which has extended itself out over the 7 seas into foreign lands, where golf has become an international ambassador of goodwill and fair play. The autumn golf meeting at the end of September is the principal event of the year in this part of the world. Although there are many inland golf courses in Scotland, the most famous seem to be those of the traditional seaside type, among the sand dunes, where there is usually no out of bounds, the sea being treated as a hazard. Since becoming an amateur golfer, it has been the ambition of your narrator to drive a ball from the home tee at St. Andrews. And now at last, that ambition is about to be gratified. And that's that. In 1754, the first championship match was played here by a king and a tradesman against 2 nobles. The balls they used were made of leather and filled with feathers. If a ball broke, which it frequently did, the new ball was put where the largest fragment of the old one fell. Because of the prolific growth of daisies on the course, they were obliged to use colored balls. One of the most unusual cemeteries in the world is the one at St. Andrews, which contains the graves of famous golfers. In memory of Tommy, son of Thomas Morris, who died 25th of December, 1875, aged 24 years, deeply regretted by numerous friends and all golfers. He thrice in succession won the champion's belt and held it without rivalry and yet without envy, his many amiable qualities being no less acknowledged than his many golfing achievements. This monument has been erected by contributions from 60 golfing societies. Verily, golf is taken very seriously at St. Andrews. And it is here that we conclude our impressions of a wee bit of Scotland. 700 years ago, a group of disgruntled barons ushered King John of England onto this plain, known as Runnymede, and forced him to sign the Great Charter, which has become a legal heritage among the democracies of the world. Not far from this noted landmark is the castle to which the frustrated king was permitted to return after signing the immortal Magna Carta. Windsor Castle has been the chief residence of the sovereigns of Great Britain for over 850 years, during which time it has passed through many vicissitudes. But this old round tower has long been the central feature of the castle. Situated on an elevation overlooking the town are the royal apartments in which the royal family resides while at Windsor Castle. In the latter part of the 11th century, William the Conqueror built a castle on this site, but the present one dates from Henry III, who reigned in the middle of the 13th century, with many later modifications culminating in a complete restoration begun in 1824 and completed in the reign of Queen Victoria. During its long and eventful existence, the traditions of architecture have been well perpetuated in the castle as well as in the royal buildings which surround it, one of the most impressive of which is this old Elizabethan masterpiece. The town of Windsor is a dignified residential city, thriving on the pomp and ceremony associated with the castle. Its Guild Hall, dating back to 1686, was completed by the famous English architect, Christopher Wren. Almost as traditional as its architecture is the British sport of horse racing, and Ascot Heath, about 6 miles from Windsor, is perhaps the oldest official racing meet in all of England. The Ascot races, instituted in the year of 1711 by Queen Anne, have always had royal patronage, and although the land on which the meetings are held belongs to the Crown, the races are well attended and enthusiastically supported by all classes. Although Ascot has one of the largest and most up-to-date totalizators in the country, bookmakers do a flourishing trade on both sides of the course. A bookmaker and his assistant, known as a penciler, need a keen ear and a quick brain. Now and then, heavy odds might go against a bookie and cause him to go out of business on the spot. But this is a rare occurrence, and generally speaking, his reputation for fair play is seldom questioned. And now they're off again. The flying of the royal standard above the royal enclosure indicates the presence of the king and queen. No pictorial resume of traditional England would be complete without including at least a few of its ancient cathedrals, one of the oldest of which may be seen here in the city of Lincoln. Lincoln is situated in northern England and has many items of historic interest, but its famous cathedral is usually the main attraction for all visitors. Among its cherished possessions is a contemporary copy of Magna Carta. Situated as it is on a hill overlooking the city, it can be seen from all angles, each one of which presents an individual architectural achievement. When we realize that the founding of this magnificent cathedral dates back to the year of 1075, we can appreciate how well the exponents of Christianity built their houses of worship in this part of the world. Christianity was first brought to England in the year of 597 by St. Augustine, who was sent from Rome as a missionary by the Pope. The ancient town of Glastonbury owes its origin and its fame to its celebrated abbey, which is said to be the first and greatest house of the oldest and most famous monastic order, representing the earliest Christian foundation in England. Under Dunstan, who became abbot in 940 and introduced the Benedictine rule, this abbey became a center of light and learning in the Christian world. The cathedral at Wells is one of the smaller but one of the most attractive cathedrals in England. The present building was begun in the latter part of the 12th century. Continuing along our cathedral trail, we visit the town of Salisbury, situated on the plain where William the Conqueror once reviewed his troops. Here, too, the dominating factor of interest is the Salisbury Cathedral, which was begun in 1220 and completed 38 years later. In contrast to the famous landmarks of Christianity is this unique worshiping place at Stonehenge, where the ancient Druids are believed to have celebrated the rites of their prehistoric faith. These monoliths of granite and sandstone are believed to have formed an altar of worship upon which human sacrifices may have been offered. According to scientific calculations, this mystery in stone was erected about 1,700 years before the dawn of Christianity. From ancient times, Stonehenge has been an object of human curiosity and conjecture, and no one has been able to reveal undisputed evidence of its origin or purpose. But it is generally agreed that these mystic monoliths are the remains of a sacred temple dedicated to the sun god. And so the tradition of worship goes on through the ages, creating hope and faith in the hearts of mankind. We are in Holland, a serene little country with about 12,000 miles of picturesque canals and waterways, peacefully winding in and around an indefinable number of pastures and farmlands, cities and towns, all redundant with the simpler and more wholesome things of life. The innumerable waterways in this colorful land provide an excellent means of transportation. And in wintertime, when frozen solid, they become excellent routes for traffic on sleds and skates. But rural Holland presents its most charming scenes during the milder seasons, when the attractive dairy maids quietly row forth in their boats to collect the daily supply of milk from various little stations along their routes. About 5/6 of the entire country, which was once covered by water and then wrested from the sea by Dutch ingenuity and labor, now consists of cultivated fields and grazing areas, along with a sizable portion used for vegetable gardening and the growing of flowers. In this bovine paradise, it is only natural that agriculture should be a leading industry, making Holland famous for its prize-winning cattle and choice dairy products, not the least of which is the celebrated Edam cheese, made in the rich polder district surrounding the ancient town of Alkmaar. When prepared for the local market, the cheese is rolled into balls, which apparently are not damaged by the bouncing they take as they fall upon the pavement. Every Friday is market day at Alkmaar, where the farmers and merchants assemble from all parts of northern Holland for the purpose of buying and selling cheese. A small sample is usually tasted by the buyer, and if it satisfies him, negotiations are entered into whereby the buyer emphasizes his bid by briskly slapping the seller's hand, as illustrated here, a custom dating back through the centuries. 3 slaps mean a sale, and it is just as binding as a written contract. Cheese is one of Holland's chief sources of food, and it is said to be a major factor in the longevity and health of the native people. The uniformed cheese porters elected to the position for life by their fellow citizens wear colored straw hats indicating the guild to which they belong. They carry their precious cargoes in traditional wooden cradles to the scales contained in the ancient weighhouse, where cheeses have been weighed for almost 4 centuries. Although the wages are not very high and the work is laborious, the position of cheese carrier is highly esteemed. Following the weighing formality, the balls of cheese are placed in troughs and rolled to vehicles and boats for transport to the factories, where they are cleaned and wrapped in airtight cellophane for their journey to the markets of the world. Remotely situated in the northeastern section of the province of Utrecht, on the shores of the Zuider Zee, or the IJsselmeer as it is now called, is the colorful little village of Spakenburg, where most of the inhabitants are engaged in the fishing industry or its allied branches. Although the reclamation of land from the Zuider Zee was undoubtedly a tremendous boon for the farmers, it had certain disadvantages for many of the fishermen, who were literally placed on dry land and forced to turn to farming for a livelihood. But old Spakenburg, however, escaped this fate, and it still remains as one of the most quaint little fishing villages in all of Holland. Verily, we are now far from the madding crowd, where the pageantry of yesterday is still a living reality, and the amenities of life are simple, wholesome, and pleasant. Practically every district in this part of the country has its own style of costume, so definitely defined that a student of authentic Dutch costumes can name each town or district by the attire of the inhabitants. Spakenburg is especially noted for the unique costumes worn by its women, and they are not dressed for the benefit of tourists, for visitors from the outside world are not as common here as they are in other parts of Holland. Owing to the absence of men, Spakenburg appears to be a woman's domain, and this is probably because the men spend most of their daylight hours at sea in fishing boats. To us, the women appear like the living models of the old Dutch masters, whose paintings have preserved on canvas such faces as we see here in real life. Hoorn is another typically Dutch provincial town on the Zuider Zee. Although the little village of about 13,000 inhabitants is now known as a dead city, it is steeped in history and possesses many remains of a glorious past when it was a commercial town of considerable importance. But at the end of the 18th century, a period of stagnation and decline set in. By different causes, trade and navigation disappeared. The institutions were abolished, and many old monuments were destroyed. An interesting old landmark dating back to the days when Hoorn was at the height of its career is this typical example of 17th century architecture. En route to the little village of Staphorst, we meet an obliging couple who have donned this attire to show us the traditional wedding garments worn by their parents. Hats like this are still worn by the more conservative peasantry on special occasions. Perhaps the most unique headdress to be seen in this charming country is that worn by the younger mothers and children of Staphorst. Somehow, this part of Holland impresses us as a living page from the past, when life was less complicated and the wants of man were much more simple. While mother performs her domestic chores with little daughter as her companion, father and son work side by side in the fields. When we compare the density of population in Holland, which is about 1 person per acre of ground, with the United States, where there are approximately 100 acres for every 7 persons, it is easy to realize why the Netherlands is constantly seeking means and ways to increase the yield of its soil. After the toil of the day, a favorite diversion is a bicycle ride along the level country roads. Holland is a land of small properties, and consequently a truly democratic spirit has taken hold of the country. As there is no abject poverty, there is an atmosphere of comfort, peace, and contentment everywhere. Prior to the last World War, the stork was a very conspicuous bird in Holland. But during the food shortages caused by the recent war, all of the storks, it is said, were either eaten or frightened away. So now nothing remains to commemorate their memory except the deserted stork nests on the roof of the farmhouses. Nevertheless, the absence of the stork has had no effect on the baby population. As a matter of fact, there has been a tremendous increase in the birth rate since Mr. Stork vanished from the land. And here is a good example of the rising generation that is now blessing Holland with great promises for the future. And it is with this thought that we most reluctantly say, farewell to colorful Holland. This is rural England, ancient land, wondrous land, teeming with history and tradition. For centuries, it has generously given forth its manna of life to the generations that have cultivated it. And today, it continues to yield its effulgent harvest to the larders of mankind. During the recent war, the farmers of Great Britain were called upon to do their utmost toward making their country self-sustaining. And as a result of their superhuman efforts, the amount of food supplies formerly imported from abroad were cut from 50% to the present amount of less than 1/3 of the total food consumed by the country. In order to make this possible, large and small estates were broken up into farmlands, and all the resources of the soil were mobilized. Women and children worked in the fields with the men, for here, sturdy patriotism, independence, self-sufficiency, and a strong sense of duty are outstanding characteristics of the people. Even grandmother does her bit. During the past 10 years, the amount of plowed land in England alone was increased from about 2 million to approximately 8 million acres. Aided by the government, the farmers kept alive all the old traditions of British skill and experience in tilling even the most unpromising soil, so that today Britain has increased its agricultural resources beyond the bounds of pre-war reasoning, and her people realize and appreciate, as never before, the natural wealth that lies in their land. Nurtured by time and tradition, The country villages and rustic towns seem to blend into the topography of the surrounding country. Here at Bradford-on-Avon, in southwestern England, life is quiet and simple, and contentment is easily attained. In North America, a house that has weathered a century of time is often regarded as a tourist attraction. But in England, it is not unusual to find houses that have been standing for hundreds of years and are still being occupied by the descendants of the original families that built them. For rustic beauty and charm, nothing in English architecture has yet surpassed the quaint old thatch roof cottages. And although ye old-time thatchers have declined in numbers, their craftsmanship is still in great demand throughout the rural districts. As a tree reveals its age by its circles, a thatch roof cottage does likewise by its layers of thatch, as it is customary to cover an old layer with a new layer rather than replace it. A good covering of thatch will last 20 years, and some old cottages have roofs 4 or 5 feet thick. Vying with the thatcher in traditional popularity is the village blacksmith, who still perpetuates his ancient and honorable trade. In sections where there are many small farms and the horse has not yet been supplanted by modern machinery, the blacksmith's forge is seldom idle. We are informed that this humble little epic of private enterprise is represented by 3 generations, father and son and grandfather. The cattle here are favored with lush and green pastures for grazing in all seasons, and they are noted for their unusually rich milk and beef. Along the main highways in England, a unique plan of direction applies to the telephone poles, the cross beams of which always appear on the side of the pole nearest to London, so that a motorist can tell whether he is traveling toward or away from the largest city in the world. Occupying selected sites on principal roads all over the country are the Automobile Association telephone boxes. They can be opened by a special key issued to members who are entitled to make local calls free of charge. The telephone boxes are also the key points of the association's communication system, and by this means, urgent messages can be delivered to members on the road. These boxes are illuminated at night and contain particulars concerning the nearest hotels, garages, doctors, and ambulances. And now we visit one of the most famous churchyards in all of England, the old church and graveyard at Stoke Poges, where Thomas Gray was inspired to write his immortal elegy, and where the poet himself was laid to rest in the year of 1771. The death of Gray's dearest friend is said to have inspired him to write the famous elegy, from which we quote: "The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all that wealth e'er gave, awaits alike the inevitable hour. The paths of glory lead but to the grave. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bear. Full many a flower is born to blush unseen, and waste its sweetness on the desert air." The poet concluded his immortal masterpiece with this verse for his own epitaph: "Large was his bounty and his soul sincere. Heaven did a recompense as largely send. He gave to misery all he had, a tear. He gained from heaven, 'twas all he wished, a friend." About 50 miles from this old graveyard, there is another famous cemetery, only recently created, where the muffled drum sad roll has beat the soldier's last tattoo. No more on life's parade shall meet that brave and fallen few. Rest on, embalmed and sainted dead, dear as the blood you gave. No impious footsteps here shall tread the herbage of your grave. Nor shall your glory be forgot while fame her record keeps. Our honored points the hallowed spot where valor proudly sleeps. Summer storms in England often fill the sky with spectacular cloud formations, such as we see here. But storms and sensational cloud formations are not so much of a joy to the farmer, who knows too well what a sudden downpour can do to a crop of uncleared grain. In the factual scheme of things, there are only a few inches of fertile soil between man and utter starvation. And if one world harvest should fail completely, life itself would fail. So let us give thanks to the Creator of the soil and to the farmers the world over, upon whom we all must depend for the real necessities of life. And it is with this thought that we now conclude our pastoral panoramas of England. We are in the west central section of Michigan, where the Sleeping Bear sand dunes form a unique setting for Glen Lake, toward which the sands are creeping at the rate of 6 feet a year, burying trees and every unmoving object in their glacier-like path. The native Indians name this picturesque region Lilano, or Land of Delight. And the true meaning of its name has become significant to the thousands of visitors who come here for their summer holidays. The vaster body of water in the distant background is Lake Michigan, which has already absorbed thousands of acres of sand from this odd formation. Glen Lake is regarded as one of the 4 most beautiful lakes in the world, and it is particularly noted for its constantly changing colors. Boating, bathing, and fishing are popular diversions here. But for a most unusual thrill, we suggest a ride over the sand dunes in these so-called dunes-mobiles, which are appropriately equipped with balloon tires and other accessories for desert travel. This strange area extends for 5 miles along the coast, and it is said to be the world's largest moving sand dune. Not far from here, on Grand Traverse Bay, an arm of Lake Michigan, lies Traverse City, the cherry capital of the world. About a century ago, the first white settlers were attracted here by extensive pine forests, which were eventually exhausted. Then, by way of experiment, a farmer planted an acre of cherry trees, and the results were so phenomenal that today, this region is the proud bearer of over 1 million cherry trees, making it necessary to import thousands of laborers to harvest and process the crops. In peak seasons, about 25 million pounds of cherries go through the canning plants in this region. We arrive at the Ogemaw State Game Refuge just in time to witness the feeding of the fawns. These fascinating creatures were found wandering like little orphans in the forest and were brought here for care and protection. While we're on the subject of animals, let's drive down to Harrison, where old Spikehorn Myers holds forth with his family of bears. This eccentric character, known as the Bear Man of Michigan, has spent most of his 80 years with dumb animals, in preference, he says, to human beings. He seems to have a remarkable influence over bears in particular, and although their love caresses, as he calls them, often knock him about, he never seems to fear them. Fear, he says, is readily sensed by all animals, and they are quick to take advantage of it. Even tame bears are dangerous when they are with cubs. But old Spikehorn Myers mingles freely with mother bears and cubs at any time. Traveling northward across the Strait of Mackinac, which joins Lake Michigan with Lake Huron, we come to the Upper Peninsula, where Lake Huron adds an expansive portion of its picturesque shores to the long coastline of Michigan. The Great Lakes which surround the state of Michigan make it a veritable land of lakes, in which may be seen boats of every kind and description. This is one of the icebreakers used during the winter months to keep the lanes of traffic open throughout the Great Lakes. The annual boat regatta is a traditional attraction at Mackinac Island, a popular vacation resort which has distinguished itself as the last stand of the horse by excluding all forms of motorized vehicles. Famous among the many fine hotels on this unique island is the Grand Hotel, with the longest porch in the world. It was in this historic region that the Aboriginal Indians first saw the coming of the white man, and according to local historians, the actual spot upon which the Indian scouts stood was this ancient lookout, now called Castle Rock. At the east end of the Upper Peninsula, we arrive at Sault Ste. Marie, the oldest white settlement in Michigan, which shares with its Canadian namesake across the river the distinction of being the proud custodian of the world-famous Soo Locks. The St. Mary's River connects Lake Superior with Lake Huron, and in former days the falls extended across the river from shore to shore, forming a natural barrier to boat and canoe traffic. In 1845, the first steamboat that entered Lake Superior, a 280-ton craft, was portaged past the falls in a crude cradle built on greased waves, and the time required was 7 weeks. Today, vessels 10 times that size can be moved through the locks in less than an hour. Surrounded as it is by the Great Lakes, Michigan is favored by water communication with 7 states, and about 4/5 of its water freight passes through the Soo Locks, the largest waterway gate in the world, accommodating more tonnage annually than the combined capacity of the Suez and Panama canals. And all this in spite of the fact that the operation of the Soo Locks is limited to 8 months in the year because of freezing weather. Most of the tonnage passing through is iron ore, but there is considerable traffic in other commodities, particularly trucks and automobiles, from the gigantic automotive factories of Michigan. We are now on the shore of Lake Superior, the largest of the Great Lakes, in a region that is noted for its tourist allure. Among the many tributaries of Lake Superior is the Tequamanon River, which flows through the land that inspired Henry Wadsworth Longfellow to write his immortal story of Hiawatha. It was here in the forest primeval, within the sound of Tequamanon Falls, that Hiawatha built his birch bark canoe. And it is here in modern times that we choose to pause a while and picnic with our newfound friends. And it is here that we now conclude our roaming in Michigan. route to the coast of Devon, we visit the ancient city of Bath, which has a recorded history dating back to the year 44 A.D., when the Roman invaders, taking advantage of the natural hot water springs which they found here, established an elaborate system of baths, the remains of which are among the most important Roman relics in the British Isles. About 1,400 years ago, the Saxons captured this coveted old watering place, but it was not until the 18th century that the present city was designed and built in this dignified style of architecture. About the year 1770, when the popularity of Bath was on the increase and a large number of people were beginning to populate the city, it was decided to build a fashionable residential suburb across the Avon. The first need was to span the river, and local architects built this bridge, the features of which resemble the old London Bridge. The present Abbey Church, known as the Lantern of England because of its numerous windows, was built in the 16th century and is the dominating landmark in the city. It seems to be at its best pictorially when it reflects its architectural grandeur in the waters of this old Roman bath. According to the legend, a bishop named Oliver King conceived the plan of this church through a vision, which revealed to the bishop many of the architectural features that now perpetuate his memory, one of the most unusual of which was this ladder, showing angels struggling in their ascent to the top, as if symbolizing the ladder of life. Bath was transformed in the 18th century from an ancient city to a favorite resort for English nobility and society. And the man chiefly responsible for this development was Beau Nash, who was regarded as the arbiter of elegance and the uncrowned King of Bath. In the time of Queen Victoria, this unique conveyance was used as a means of travel to and from the baths, and we had the distinction of riding in the only one to be found here today in a perfect state of preservation. The present-day bathers are confined to undercover bathing in private baths, the waters of which are said to contain health-giving properties. Perhaps the most remarkable of the ancient baths that have been excavated and preserved is the one known as the Great Roman Bath. It is no longer used for bathing purposes, but it provides an interesting attraction for visitors, as well as a swimming pool for colorful fish. Here is another relic of Roman times, which dates back to the 4th century. In former days, it was the custom after a hot bath to return to the taxi chair dressed in an appropriate robe and be encased in this fashion so as to be protected from the sudden change in temperature. Not a bad idea for cold weather jaunts in any country. On the south coast of Devon, we visit Teignmouth, one of the most popular of British pleasure resorts. Aside from its modern diversions, Teignmouth has a stirring history, which goes back to the days when French pirates landed on this beach and tried in vain to ransack the town. Even in our day, barbed wire barricades, only recently removed, were strung along the shores of Teignmouth in anticipation of an enemy landing which never materialized. But all that is in the past, we hope, and the happy diversions of peace now occupy the people who patronize this resort. Sailing along the coast of Devon, we pass colorful monoliths that jut out into the ocean to be molded by time and tide into oddly shaped images such as we see here. A few hours' journey from Teignmouth is Torquay, another popular resort on the coast of Devon, built on 7 hills like ancient Rome in a charming setting with a variety of scenic interest and an ideal climate. And on this fine Sunday morning in Torquay, we are greeted by one of the best-looking bobbies to be seen in all of England. Incidentally, the word bobby is derived from the given name of Robert, or Bobby Peel, the man who organized the first bobbies in London about 125 years ago. Being in a subtropical belt, Torquay's gardens abound in a prolific variety of colorful flowers, the fragrance of which adds much to the romantic settings in which they bloom. Thanks to an ideal climate with generous and gentle showers of rain, Torquay has become a floral paradise in which horticulturists vie with one another in developing the finest blooms. Words alone cannot do justice to the charm of this famous resort, so we've added music to our words and composed a song which we now humbly dedicate to the delightful day that we spent down by the sea in Torquay. By the sea, down by the sea in Torquay, sailboats galore, racing the sea and the shore. The Lake District of England has been featured in song and story for centuries, and among the authors and poets inspired by its scenic beauty were Spenser, Gray, Shelley, Coleridge, Ruskin, and William Wordsworth, who probably contributed more than any other writer to the fame of this inspiring region. The queen of the 16 lakes in the district is Windermere, the largest lake in all of England. Unique ferry boats like this one are used to connect the important traffic routes throughout the Lake District. Outstanding among the historic landmarks in this region is the old grammar school at Hawkshead, which the poet William Wordsworth attended from 1778 to 1783. The old sundial over the doorway once confirmed the hour of arrival and departure for the school children who crossed the threshold below, and it still casts a shadow over its old face for the curious tourists who gaze upon it today. Not far from the schoolhouse is the quaint little town of Hawkshead, typical of numerous other villages scattered here and there throughout the Lake District. Aside from the modern motor cars that occasionally pass through its main thoroughfare, Hawkshead lives in the past, very much the same as it was in the days when the poet Wordsworth walked and dreamed in its streets. It was while residing in this cottage that Wordsworth is said to have written most of his best-known poems. Among the famous guests who visited with him here were Sir Walter Scott and Samuel Coleridge. Not far from here stands the little church of St. Oswald, in the old graveyard of which lie the mortal remains of William Wordsworth and members of his family. No epitaph adorns his tombstone, but his immortal verses will always be a tribute to his memory. Undoubtedly, the happiest years of Wordsworth's life were spent in the Lake District, and scenes like this were the unfailing source of his inspiration. This rose-covered bower is the modest fulfillment of an artist's dream, and it provides a perfect setting for our introduction to the caretaker's little daughter, who curiously toddles out from her floral abode to investigate the presence of strangers. At the foothills of the Lake District, along the northwestern coast of England, lies Morecambe Bay, one of the most popular holiday and health resorts in the British Isles. Morecambe is one of the few seaside resorts having spa waters with medicinal qualities. The springs rise on the northern shores of the bay, and it is recorded that they were used as a curative by the monks of the ancient Cartmel Priory more than 500 years ago. Although the sports of bowling, tennis, golf, cricket, boating, and fishing are very popular here, the outstanding attraction appears to be the great open-air swimming stadium, which is one of the largest of its kind in the world. The pool is 330 feet long and 99 feet wide. It has a total holding capacity of 1.25 million gallons of water, which is drawn from the open sea and carefully filtered and chemically treated from hour to hour. A unique feature of the pool is the seating arrangement for thousands of spectators. About 80 miles from here lies the ancient city of York, one of the most historic centers in the United Kingdom. As far back as the year 71 AD, this grand old metropolis was the military headquarters of Roman legions, and some evidence of practically every important period in the history of England is preserved in its landmarks, the most outstanding of which is the famous York Minster, built in the latter part of the 15th century. This historic old edifice has been damaged by fire on 2 occasions. The bombs of modern warfare have menaced it, and cannonballs from Cromwell's army have bounded along its outer pavements. It has been robbed of its treasures and stripped of its ornaments by puritanical fanatics. But in spite of all, it still stands as one of the most magnificent buildings in the world. This tower is all that remains of an ancient castle dating back to the middle of the 13th century. Recent excavations have unearthed human skeletons as tragic evidence of the political prisoners who were formerly cast into a deep dungeon in the center of the tower. Other excavations recently performed have revealed the early history of the ancient Wall of York, which encircles the original town for a distance of about 3 miles. When the Normans first came here, much of the old Roman wall was still standing. For some unknown reason, the Normans covered it with a great mound, upon which the present wall was built. Although it was constructed in the early part of the 13th century, the people of York often refer to it as the modern wall. In medieval times, there were 5 gateways leading into the town, and each one was heavily fortified. This is one of the gateways to that section of the city which is known as Roman York. York is now a busy and progressive metropolis with over 100,000 inhabitants, and although it has taken full advantage of modern innovations, it has artfully managed to do so without sacrificing the charm of its ancient landmarks. An impressive illustration of which is to be seen in the ruins of St. Mary's Abbey, located almost in the heart of the city. This was a Benedictine monastery founded by William Rufus in the year of 1098. Verily, the ancient city of York has well endured the transitions of time, and we of this generation may learn much from its undying traditions. And it is with this thought that we now conclude our tour of northern England. This is Edinburgh, capital of Scotland and wonder city of the British Isles, where about 500,000 inhabitants live their lives and ply their trades in fair competition with the finest metropolitan cities in the world. For over 1,000 years, Edinburgh has been a city of culture and refinement, specializing in the propagation of religion, science, and the finer arts. Among the many men of letters listed in its Hall of Fame is Sir Walter Scott, who was born in Edinburgh August 15th, 1771. It was here in his beloved hometown that Scott was first inspired to write the stories and poems that have placed him among the supreme masters of literature. On Princess Street, almost in the heart of the city he loved so well, stands the Scott Monument, a fitting tribute to his memory from a grateful people. Conspicuously situated on a rock overlooking the city stands old Edinburgh Castle, a relic of bygone days. As far back as the year 1000 A.D., this historic ground was the site of a royal residence. Among the outstanding landmarks of Scotland are Holyrood Palace and Abbey, where the widowed Mary, Queen of Scots, was married to James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, the chief conspirator in the plot to murder Mary's husband, Lord Darnley. It is a far cry from this old ruin to the Forth Bridge, which at the time of its construction was the largest cantilever bridge in the world. It was completed in 1890, and it is still the main railway connection on the east coast between northern and southern Scotland. this wonder of steel construction indirectly associates itself with the great steel magnate, Andrew Carnegie, who was born not far from here in the town of Dunfermline. It is a noble span from this humble birthplace of Andrew Carnegie to the numerous libraries and educational institutions throughout the world that owe their existence to his philanthropy. Among the best-known lakes in Scotland is Loch Lomond, the name of which has been perpetuated in one of the world's most popular songs. On the banks of the River Nith in Dumfries, we are thrilled at the thought of being in that section of Scotland where Robert Burns lived and died, and which inspired him to write most of the poems that made him world famous. It was in this old town of Dumfries that Robbie Burns was obliged to act as an exciseman, a somewhat unpopular occupation, as it had to do with the levying of local taxes. Nevertheless, the brief unpopularity he may have experienced has long since been forgotten, and the outstanding monument in all of Dumfries is the one that has been erected to the memory of Robert Burns. Here stands the house in which Burns lived in distressing poverty during the latter part of his life. It is now used as a museum and headquarters of the Dumfries Burns Club. Among the famous paintings to be seen here is the one called the Mauchline Holy Fair. In the town of Ayr, we visit the Tam O'Shanter Inn, which was once a favorite haunt of Robert Burns. Not far from here, at Alloway, is the humble cottage in which Scotland's most popular poet was born. A few miles from Dumfries, at Ellisland, stands the old farmhouse in which Burns lived and wrote such immortal poems as My Heart's in the Highlands, To Mary in Heaven, and Tam O'Shanter, which he is said to have composed while walking along a path in this peaceful setting. Aside from Robert Burns, other poets have found inspiration in this romantic region, one of whom was William Douglas, who composed an immortal poem to his beloved Annie Laurie, and that poem, set to music, is now one of the world's most familiar songs. Annie Laurie was a bonny lassie who once lived on Maxwelton Braes in this very house. Annie Laurie, Although Annie Laurie has long since departed this life, the pastoral peace of Maxwelton's Braes has not changed, and placid cattle still graze in the fields where early falls the dew. It was while plowing one of these fields that Robbie Burns overturned the nest of a field mouse, which inspired him to write the famous poem, including the well-known lines, The best laid schemes o' mice and men gang after gley. In the valley of the River Doon at Alloway is another picturesque locale, which inspired Robert Burns to write many of his poems. This is the famous old Brig o' Doon over which Tam O'Shanter crossed on his wild ride. The peaceful stream which flows beneath the bridge has been immortalized in one of Burns's most popular songs, Ye Banks and Braes o' Bonnie Doon.
How can he bloom so fresh and fair? How can he
The graveyard around Old Alloway Kirk also played a prominent part in Burns's poem about the hectic adventures of Tam O'Shanter. The mortal remains of Robert Burns, the beloved bard of Scotland, lie buried in this mausoleum at Dumfries. He gave to the world a heritage of poetry and song, not the least of which was Auld Lang Syne, the world's greatest song of conviviality and friendship. This is one of the many interesting sections of the famous Old Port of London, where the Thames River is flanked by such historic landmarks as the Tower of London and the Tower Bridge, the twin bascules of which are constantly raised and lowered to accommodate an endless procession of boat and vehicular traffic. The Port of London comprises 150 miles of industrialized riverbank and 700 acres of enclosed dock water. 27 bridges span the river, and practically every one of them has inspired at least a chapter in the enthralling story of Father Thames. The value in incoming and outgoing goods totals about $3 billion a year. Perhaps the oldest monument to be seen along the river is the so-called Cleopatra's Needle, an Egyptian granite obelisk, originally erected near Cairo about 1,500 years before Christ. Far beyond the Port of London, in the vicinity of Oxford, the Thames loses its busy commercial atmosphere and takes on a more tranquil mood, which is ideal for swimming, fishing, and boating, while organized cruises provide an excellent medium for seeing some of the most picturesque places along the river. Reminiscent of a more leisurely age are the numerous locks through which all boats must pass in navigating the upper part of the Thames. In one stretch of 136 miles, where the fall of the river is about 200 feet, there are 49 locks, and most of them are operated exactly as they have been for the past 100 years or more. Many of the locks have been in the care of the same families for generations, and they seem to take particular pride in adorning them with colorful little flower gardens, such as we see here. Even the ancient Romans made dams to keep their boats floating when they navigated the Thames. The beautiful swans which are seen along the river's course are known as the royal birds because by tradition, only the king and the vintners and dyers' companies enjoy the privilege of marking and keeping swans on the River Thames. When Englishmen in far-flung places of the British Empire dream of home sweet home, not a few of them are thinking of cottages like this. Along with the work that man has done to beautify the banks of the Thames, Mother Nature contributes her share with prolific growths of colorful wildflowers. The river is said to be well stocked with fish, such as roach, bleak, and perch, but apparently they weren't biting on the day of our visit. Most of the fishermen, however, seem content to sit peacefully on the banks of the stream in simple communion with Mother Nature. river on this earth has been more instrumental in molding the course of a people's destiny than the Thames, which has been referred to as the liquid history of England. Like an artery of life, it has flown for ages along its 215-mile course, watering the land and providing the means of navigation and trade, as well as pleasure for a sizable portion of England's population. The students of Oxford and Eton have always taken full advantage of the proximity of the Thames for the ever-popular sport of rowing. At Eton College, where rowing vies with cricket in sport, the rowers are called wet bobs, and the cricketers are known as dry bobs. We are now at the Henley Regatta, one of the most popular events in the British Isles, during which thousands of sport-loving fans turn out in a spirit of unrestrained gaiety. But the natural diversions of the Thames are not limited to any special events. And when the weather is ideal, especially on Sundays and holidays, the river presents a colorful pageant of simple recreation, seemingly enjoyed by all classes among the outdoor-loving people of England. Although most of the people appear to confine their diversions to the main river, not a few of them prefer the little side streams that flow into or out of the Thames. Among the famous old landmarks that may be visited within the vicinity of the river is one that will be particularly remembered by the American GIs who were stationed near Oxford during the World War, and it is known as the Trout Inn. Aside from modern soldiers and civilians, this sequestered old hostelry has opened and closed its doors to the students of Oxford for generations. And on this particular occasion, it is your narrator's pleasure to quaff a mug of old English ale with the landlady herself. Incidentally, our day on this grand old river inspired us to compose a simple little tune, which we have made the music theme of this subject, and we humbly dedicate it now to old Father Thames as the Thames Waltz. Here, where the fascinating reflections of our boat bestir the so-called liquid history of England, we most reluctantly say farewell to the Thames. are in Egypt, on the beautiful shores of Alexandria, where the alluring waves of the Mediterranean tempt us to linger and rest a while. But this time, the purpose of our visit is not so much to photograph scenery as it is to photograph people. And we know of no more fitting way to meet the modern people of Egypt than by way of music, as rendered by the band of the University of Alexandria. Here we see little to remind us that we are in the land of the ancient pharaohs. Your narrator believes the quickest way to get acquainted with the people in any country is to ask them simple but tactful questions about themselves.
Mr. Motza, were you born in Egypt?
Yes, in Cairo.
In Cairo. And what is your occupation?
I work for General Motors Near East in the technical department.
General Motors. What is the attitude here toward foreign enterprise?
They are welcomed and they are appreciated.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. And, Captain, is there any word that you'd like to say in conclusion?
The captain answers in his own language to the effect that he would like to extend warmest greetings from his country to the democratic peoples of the world. And being the local head of the National Tourist Police, a unique organization which caters exclusively to visitors, he naturally invites the whole world to visit the land of the pyramids. The most popular college sport in Egypt is football, or soccer. Here we witness a game between the Faculty of Commerce and the Faculty of Law of the King Farouk University. Today, the two great universities of Egypt, the King Fahd First Foundation in Cairo and the King Farouk First University in Alexandria, number between them more than 20,000 students, female as well as male. The young women of Egypt are now enjoying privileges that were unknown to their mothers. This young lady, for example, is one of the first of her sex to be permitted to practice law in the land of the pharaohs, and her companions are all college students, modern in thought and deed, but still a little shy of strangers from the outside world. And speaking of modern freedoms for women in Egypt, here is an outstanding example. In any country, it is a privilege to meet such an attractive and talented young lady as Miss Akila El-Naqib. She is not only an expert horsewoman, she also excels in golf, tennis, and swimming, speaks 7 languages fluently, and is an accomplished musician. Her father, Dr. El-Naqib Pasha, is the director of this King Fahd First Hospital, one of the most modern in all of Egypt. And it is here that we meet another fine example of modern Egyptian womanhood. This young nurse informs us that she is only one of many Egyptian girls who have become public nurses in the past generation, and she modestly expresses great interest in her work, as well as the hospital which she so proudly serves. And now, by way of contrast, we behold the Egypt of yesteryear, the same old Egypt that was known to Cleopatra and the builders of the pyramids. In a land that is often credited with being the cradle of Western civilization, where men like Moses and Pythagoras went to school, it is difficult to understand why the past clings so tenaciously to the present. But it must be borne in mind that life as we see it here is narrowing down to remote districts. And with the compulsory educational program now inaugurated by the government, it is safe to predict that this phase of Egyptian life is destined to become obsolete. In fact, if the present rate of progress continues, in another generation or two, the antiquated customs of ancient Egypt may be completely obliterated. No picture of ancient or modern Egypt, however, would be complete without a camel, which from time immemorial has been picturesquely associated with the land of the pharaohs. Returning to modern Alexandria, we are privileged to meet Lieutenant Colonel Ibrahim Mustafa, commander of the municipal police, who was trained under the strict military routine of the British when they maintained troops in Egypt. And although the British soldiers have since withdrawn from Alexandria, he honors them still by maintaining their martial traditions as well as their music, a selection of which is now rendered by this all-Egyptian band. An Egyptian band playing Men of Harlech is certainly a fair tribute to Wales. And saints alive, hear what they're playing now, a medley of familiar old Irish tunes. Naturally, there were Scots among the soldiers who established British training in Egypt. And if there is any doubt about it, just open your eyes and ears to this. And so life goes among the Egyptian people on parade.
Buongiorno. Today is Palm Sunday, and we, people of Venice, have assembled again in our beloved St. Mark's Square, as we have done for centuries, to commune with each other and to listen to the celebrated bells of the campanile as they toll in commemoration of this holy day. Although Christian peoples in other parts of the world may be carrying palm branches from church in honor of this solemn occasion, we carry olive branches as a more fitting symbol of peace on earth and goodwill toward men.
All right, Bambino. These pins, no good, Bambino. I can't get the paints on. I can get the paints off.
Buongiorno.
I am just a voice in the crowd, but I am proud of Venice, for I was born here. As a boy, I paraded with the other boys in the Piazza San Marco, and I stood and watched the hours change in the old clock tower, and I saw the little iron man strike the time of day, even as they do now. But that was a long time ago, and I am now an old man moving silently among the modern people in the piazza. I remember that fateful day in 1902, when the original campanile, rocked by earthquake, crashed into the Piazza San Marco. 10 years later, this campanile was built on the site of the first one.
Why don't your mother fix the crazy pens to stay up?
I am also a voice in the crowd, but this is my Venezia, for I, too, was born here. I remember my grandmother died on the very day the old campanile fell in the piazza. There was a funeral procession, and it passed through this canal. I was 5 years old before I saw growing trees, and that was the day I rode in a gondola with the funeral procession out to the cemetery. The graves of my family are just behind that white wall. And here is the church, around which I first saw living trees. I think the trees meant more to me than the high mass that was said that day for my poor old grandmother. God rest her soul.
Almost 400 bridges span the innumerable waterways of our unique city, and the largest of these is the world-famous Rialto Bridge.
I am a gondoliere, and I have always rowed the canals of Venezia Bella since I was able to lift an oar. My job is not as easy as it looks, but I can always make it lighter with a song.
Grandi comori di rose, di giunchiglie, di verbene, di gerani tuberose, la mia gondola contiene. Presa ad una testa bionda, che fra le verbene affonda e di rose si incorona il mio capo s'abbandona.
Along the Rialto Promenade, we return again to the people on parade.
I sail at the balloons on a Sunday. All the other days, I work like a dog in the canals.
Although Venezia is a land of boats, there is a limited amount of wheeled traffic. And here is the only automobile in town.
Getting silly again and again is a crazy pens fall down.
And so life goes in our Venice, the city of watery streets, black gondolas, unique architecture, and romantic people on parade. Arrivederci presto a Venezia.
It's springtime in the Netherlands, and the countryside is all aglow with colorful blossoms, which enhance the proverbial picturesqueness of the old windmills and instill the hearts of all nature lovers with the romantic spirit of spring. Home sweet home in any country is charming enough, but here we find an added attraction in the profusion of floral plants that are always an inseparable part of even the most humble homes in Holland. The Dutch people literally worship flowers, and among the first words taught to their children are the names of flowering plants and blossoms. And as the children grow older, they usually take part in the numerous parades that march in the springtime, commemorating the season of blossoms and the beginning of new life in the floral kingdom. Verily, this is a floral kingdom, and the crowning bloom is the tulip. Nowhere in the world have we seen such a variety and such an abundance of this colorful flower. In addition to the cultivated fields, tulips and hyacinths are planted along the public highways, and every home garden features choice specimens of these flowers. Windmills have always been associated with Holland, and their introduction into the country dates back to the 15th century, when an ingenious Dutchman perfected a water mill so that it could be used in pumping water from the marshlands. Power-driven motors are now doing the work of the old mills, but historical societies have taken steps to preserve many of the more interesting examples. Within a 25-mile radius of Amsterdam and The Hague, in the vicinity of the coastal dunes, we behold the richest, most colorful bulblands in the world. The choice specimens are grown in greenhouses, and their values range as high as $1,000 for a single bulb. This is not so fabulous when we realize that it takes from 5 to 10 years of experienced supervision to cultivate and mature these very rare bulbs. The history of the tulip has never been traced beyond the 16th century, and according to European writers, Turkey seems to be the country where the flower originated. But the name was appropriated from the Persian language and means a turban. Tulips were first brought to Holland about the middle of the 16th century, and the curious demand for them eventually led to one of the most extraordinary speculative manias the world has ever known. Much of the ordinary trade of the country was given up, and the usual occupations of the citizens were neglected, so that more time and money could be given to this new and quick method of becoming rich. Fabulous prices were paid for rare species. A prize of 100,000 florins was offered for a black tulip, a feat that was considered impossible at the time. Today in Holland, there are a few rare specimens of this same black flower, and a halo of romance still lingers around it. Elaborate rules for planting, fertilizing, and caring for choice varieties of tulips were written before 1700. The Turks insisted upon pointed petals, but Europeans preferred the petals rounded. Strangely enough, the one-colored blossoms, so favorably regarded by florists today, were considered to be of little value in the first century of tulip culture. Unfortunately, the petals have no commercial value, although they are sometimes used for refertilizing the soil from whence they came. By plucking the petals in full bloom, the bulbs in the ground are better preserved and made more productive when shipped to the markets of the world. Perhaps there is no chapter in the story of mankind which has endowed a country with more color and romance than has that of the tulip industry of Holland. For not only has this glamorous occupation converted it into a dreamland of floral rainbows, it has also contributed to Holland's commercial importance among the nations of the world, so that today there is hardly a cultivated tulip growing in the gardens of the Western Hemisphere that did not have its distant origin in one of the tulip fields of Holland. Although the petals may have no value for the practical-minded bulb growers, this particular part of the business is always a source of consternation to the lovers of flowers. After the plucking, the petals are either plowed back into the earth or transported in boats to the sand dunes, where they find a sad end to their brief but colorful existence. And here again, the sentiment of flower lovers is aroused at the sight of the bulb growers marching to the wastelands of the dunes and deliberately throwing their delicate cargoes of petals upon the ground. There is one final service, however, to be credited to the petals, as they provide a delightful source of amusement for the children of the bulb growers. In conclusion, we feel that no more poetic tribute could be given to any country than the fact that it developed and gave to the Western world one of its most colorful flowers, the tulip. And it is with this thought that we most reluctantly say farewell to springtime in the Netherlands. In the land of the Zuider Zee, where countless canals and rivers peacefully wend their way, we are particularly impressed by the modern craft which is fast replacing the antiquated boats that once plied the commercial waterways of the Netherlands. We say the land of the Zuyder Zee, but this euphonious name is destined to pass into the annals of history, as the land from beneath it is being reclaimed so fast that most of the Zuyder Zee will eventually be non-existent. Nevertheless, the name will always remain in commemoration of the industrious Dutch people who wrested so much of their country from the waters of the old Zuyder Zee. In fact, nearly half of the country is below the level of the sea, and if it were not for the innumerable dikes that have been built as bulwarks against the sea, human existence in a large portion of the country would be impossible. Nestling securely behind the dike walls are the typical little Dutch villages, where the native people appear to enjoy a peaceful and contented existence. The dike walls are also the main streets for promenading, where one may see something of old Holland on parade. The odd hairdress of the children is practical as well as ornamental, for the lock of straight hair that protrudes above the eyes also acts as a sunshade. Of all the old fishing villages in the region of the Zuyder Zee, or IJsselmeer as it is now called, perhaps the best known is Volendam, and it presents a picture to us that is reminiscent of some of the colorful movie sets that we have seen in Hollywood. This is Sunday, a very important day in the lives of the native people, every one of whom, if he is able to walk, makes it a practice to attend church. Volendam is one of the few remaining villages on the Zuyder Zee where commercial fishing is still a major industry. Early Monday morning, the fishermen set sail from the harbor for the spawning ground of the Zuyder Zee, or the waters of the North Sea. And they return regularly on Friday or Saturday in order to devote Sunday to their church and to their families. They are rugged types, descending from the ancient seamen of Holland, who went down to the sea in ships patterned after this ancient model. Known as Flying Dutchmen, ships like this achieved world supremacy on the sea for Holland during the 16th and 17th centuries. This is the original model from which a Flying Dutchman was built over 300 years ago. About 3 miles off the coast of Volendam is the picturesque island of Marken, another quaint showplace in the land of the Zuyder Zee. This island was inhabited almost exclusively by fishermen and their families before the separation of the IJsselmeer from the North Sea was completed. In recent years, however, many of its old fishermen have abandoned the sea and turned to farming. Although the reclamation of new land will eventually improve Holland's economy, there are many young fishermen who still look to the sea for their livelihood, and they are reluctant to give way to the new order of things. It presents a rather pathetic problem to fishermen who are gradually being deprived of the waters in which they have fished for generations, and we are inclined to sympathize with them. But the wheels of progress must move forward, and fishing in this part of Holland must pass away with the receding waters of the Zuyder Zee. Even when Sunday comes and Daddy is home from the sea, it is his custom to lead his little family up to the wall of the great dike and direct their attention to the distant waters in which he and his shipmates spend so many of their weekday hours, fishing as a source of livelihood. But the little girl is one member of the family who will never have to go down to the sea in ships. probably her destiny will be interwoven with the soil that supplants the Zuider Zee. Off the beaten track in the northeastern section of Holland's little province of Utrecht, we visit the colorful town of Spakenburg, one of the few quaint little fishing villages still remaining on the shores of the old Zuider Zee, or the IJsselmeer. Turning from the sea to the land that has been reclaimed from it, we witness something of what is destined to be developed on a much larger scale with the passing of time. Here at Staphorst, the people have already become farm conscious and are proving their ability to adapt themselves to the development of agricultural products. And with the changing of industry from sea to land has come a change in the architecture of the countryside, where the modest little seaside cottage has given way to the more substantial country homestead. En route to The Hague, we pass many historic old castles that have been converted into picturesque farm sites. And now we have arrived in The Hague, one of Holland's oldest and most famous cities, where the Queen of the Netherlands resides. Owing to its flat surface, most of Holland lends itself to the use of bicycles, and we were told that over 300,000 of them are manufactured within the country annually. Farmers cycle to their fields, policemen cycle on their beats, office workers cycle to their places of business, shoppers do their marketing on bicycles, and even the Queen herself is an ardent cycling enthusiast. Around the famous inner court of The Hague are the ancient buildings housing the various government departments and the old Hall of Knights, built about 1280. It is now used for the annual opening of Parliament. This historic landmark was also the setting for the famous Peace Conference held in 1907. Many other old castles throughout Holland have been converted into places of learning. This is a school for the training of diplomats. About 3 miles from The Hague, we visit Scheveningen, a unique seaside resort which is the most fashionable and popular watering place in Holland. Here again, we are reminded of the important part played by bicycles in a country where 8 million inhabitants own about 4 million of them. On this beach, the basket beach chair trade is a prosperous one, for nearly every family owns or rents one for protection against sun and wind. A unique type of lifeguard is the officer on horseback, who depends chiefly on his shrill whistle to recall the bathers who may venture too far out to sea. Here on the gentle shores of the North Sea, where once an ancient fishing village flourished, thousands of Hollanders find simple and healthful diversion. And here we find it's time for us to say farewell to the land of the Zuider Zee. In our troubled world, it is fitting that we should turn back the pages of history to ancient Athens, the mother of democracy, where we may still draw inspiration from what is left of the institutions that flourished when Athens was the world's beacon light of freedom. Perhaps the most famous citadel in the history of mankind is the Acropolis, overlooking the city of Athens, a picturesque and silent tribute to the glory that was Greece. It was built over 2,500 years ago as a fortress, and after centuries of exposure to the onslaughts of warring nations, what is left of it has been preserved for the edification of a modern world. The most attractive building on the Acropolis is the Parthenon, which has passed through the vicissitudes of time with undying glory. Nothing has been written or said about the ancient Greeks that could possibly excel the beauty and grandeur of their art, which even in ruins is a silent tribute to their culture. This is all that remains of the magnificent temple of the Olympian Zeus, high god of the ancient Greeks. Glorious Athens, where once lived Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and countless other teachers of humanity, from whom freedom-loving people have inherited most of their noblest qualities. Although many of its public buildings have been erected in recent years, most of them are exact duplicates of the originals that were built in the golden age of Pericles, about 5 centuries before Christ. And this indeed is another grand tribute to the builders of ancient Greece, whose classic architecture is still regarded as the most beautiful yet designed by man. So much for Greek history. Now let's see something of modern Athens, where we witness a commendable effort on the part of the Greek people to reestablish their independence in the freedom-loving world that was born of their forefathers. Since World War II, Athens has taken on a modernistic trend, and we notice in the very tempo of its traffic a determination of movement that reveals a reviving interest in the pursuits of peace. In recent years, the Greeks have had their full measure of war and confusion, but their spirit, which reaches deep into the wells of freedom, appears to be stronger than ever. Although Athens was selected as the capital of Greece in 1834, principally for historical reasons, the metropolis has proved worthy of its position as an important political center, and also the banking, commercial, and industrial hub of a wide and scattered area. The native markets are in full swing again, all under the private enterprise system. And although nothing very luxurious may be found here, there is a fair abundance of staple products, especially fruits and vegetables. But the merchants are not so rushed that they can't take time off for an occasional smoke from a hubble bubble or water pipe. Aside from fruits and vegetables, which seem to dominate this market, one may find something of a more fanciful nature, such as these little dolls dressed in the traditional costumes of ancient Greece. Dolls naturally remind us of children, and in all of Greece we found no children more worthy of attention than the orphans of Athens. Here in an abandoned hotel has been housed only a few of the unfortunate little ones who lost their parents during the recent Civil War between the forces of freedom and the forces of slavery. Thanks to aid from other democratic countries, especially the United States, these unfortunate youngsters are now receiving a fair share of all that kind hearts and generous purses can provide. A few hours' journey from Athens in the Aegean Sea lies the historic little island of Rhodes. Through the centuries, Rhodes has been under many flags, but it has never lost the original imprint of Greek culture. The Italians took Rhodes from the Turks in 1912 and ruled the belated little island until the end of World War II, at which time Rhodes was restored to the Greeks. During the Italian regime under Benito Mussolini, much new construction was inaugurated, including these government buildings and this pier, the tower of which is said to mark the spot where the ancient Colossus of Rhodes once stood. At the time of our visit, Rhodes was a reasonably quiet and well-ordered little settlement. It appeared to be taking advantage of a breathing spell between wars. Traffic in general, by our standards, could hardly be called congested. Nevertheless, a very rigid system of traffic control was in full force. In the days when Athens was a maritime power, the harbor of Rhodes was an important rendezvous for the Athenian Navy, and even today its boats play a prominent part in the commerce and trade of the Aegean Sea. Although very little remains in Rhodes that could be associated with the early Greek settlers, an occasional ruin rises from its precious soil in silent testimony to the glory that was Greece. In the outskirts of Rhodes, there is a thermal region that attracted the attention of Benito Mussolini. he undertook to have this former Greek watering spa cleaned up and redecorated for his personal enjoyment. He also made elaborate plans for his retirement in the peaceful atmosphere of Rhodes. And the quarters he chose for this final event were none other than the castle of the Knights of St. John. This renowned fortress dates back to the days of the Crusades. But Mussolini was a modern crusader who never enjoyed the hospitality of this ancient abode. He had it refurnished and fully equipped with modern plumbing, electric lights, and all the comforts of his day. But he never lived to fulfill his dream, for such is the destiny of dictators. Not far from the castle, humble but free natives now engage in folk dancing. This group is composed of farm families who graciously abandon their work in the fields and don these costumes to dance for our entertainment. In conclusion, we salute the people of Greece, if for no other reason than the fact that it was from their ancient philosophers and institutions that we inherited our ideas of freedom and democracy, as well as our appreciation for art and culture in their noblest proportions. We are sailing into the harbor of Villefranche, one of the most colorful little resorts along the French Riviera. It is situated almost midway between Nice and Monte Carlo, and although it may not be as glamorous and exciting as its nearby sister ports, we soon discover that it has a charm and serenity all its own. The landing piers of Villefranche are not large enough to accommodate ocean-going vessels, so we go ashore in launches and are soon engrossed in the picturesque life of the village. The poet who wrote, "Men must work and women must weep," surely couldn't have been thinking of Villefranche, for here we find it to be quite the contrary. Villefranche is a popular port of call for the British Navy when cruising the Mediterranean, and it has always been a favorite rendezvous for the leisure-loving patrons of the Riviera. As in all of France, the custom of eating and drinking outdoors is a popular diversion, and it also provides an excellent opportunity to enjoy the passing parade. This interesting little resort is noted for its unique shops, in which one may purchase a kaleidoscopic assortment of odds and ends, especially souvenirs of the port. And if visitors are too busy to visit the shops will visit them, as illustrated by this itinerant peddler. Much of the fun of trading here is in bargaining for lower prices, and the merchant seems to expect it as part of his daily routine. The simplicity of life in Villefranche is the secret of its charm. Aside from tourists, Villefranche has been a source of inspiration to artists for centuries. And even today, it is not unusual to find amateurs as well as professionals reproducing their impressions of the town on canvas. Many of the old world paintings that now grace the art institutions of the New World were born in the humble hearts of artists like this, men who never knew from whence or from whom their next meal might come. On the beautiful Côte d'Azur, or Blue Coast, lies Nice, the fourth largest city in France, where over 250,000 inhabitants live, work, and play in an atmosphere that blends harmoniously with the past and the present. Nice, which is of Phoenician origin, was once burned to the ground by Barbary pirates, and through the centuries it was besieged by various powers. Until 1860, it became part of France. It was bombed in 1944, but it has since recovered to a degree of normalcy that attracts the elite of the world to its shores. Here in this utopian setting, blessed with fabulous promenades, villas, restaurants, casinos, theaters, and more than 250 hotels, people live gaily and lavishly. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, appears to be the current motto of Nice. The Riviera, meaning coast or seashore, borders the Mediterranean from Cannes, France to Spezia, Italy. And there is no more fascinating drive in all the world than the one called the Grand Corniche, which follows the Riviera from Cannes to Monte Carlo. Here at Cannes, we are intrigued by the colorful assortment of boats that enliven the harbor at all seasons of the year, but particularly in the summer season, when boatmen from all parts of the Mediterranean anchor here for a holiday on the Riviera. Each resort city along the Riviera has its own casino, and this one at Cannes rates second only to that of Monte Carlo. Although we are somewhat ahead of the season, we find a springtime atmosphere that is a happy forerunner of the life that is characteristic of the Côte d'Azur. In contrast with the large cities and gayer life along the Riviera, there is a backdrop of little villages, just a few miles from the seacoast, and foremost among them is the quaint little village of St. Paul, resting snugly in the foothills of the Maritime Alps. Although St. Paul has a comparatively small number of permanent residents, it attracts thousands of visitors, among them noted artists who come here for peace and rest from the more hectic life on the Riviera. And here again we enjoy the characteristically appetizing food of France, served in the open as usual, along with the choice wines of the country. Just behind this colorful setting, in the village square, we find a group of local men playing their favorite game, which is known as bowls. The purpose of the game is to see how near the player can roll the larger balls to the small one. This simple game is popular in all the little villages of France, and tournament plays are often witnessed by thousands of enthusiastic spectators. The most exciting sport in France, however, is cross-country bicycle racing. And now let us go for a walk through the older section of the village. And walk we must, for wheel traffic is out of the question in the narrow thoroughfares of St. Paul. Wherever we look in this quaint little village, we are impressed by its picturesqueness and the simple manners and customs of the native people. In these days of trouble and strife, it is a relief to visit a remote little village like St. Paul, where all seems to be right with the world. Children, animals, and adults all move leisurely, and no one seems to be very much concerned about what's going on in the great but hectic world outside. Most of the people who live here owe their livelihood to the fruit and olive orchards in the surrounding hills and valleys. Although they may not have all the comforts of modern living, they appear to have peace of mind, and that's something our modern machinery has not yet produced. And it is with this thought that we most reluctantly say farewell to the little village of St. Paul. As we sail into the picturesque harbor of Algiers, we recall that this was once the headquarters of the most atrocious band of pirates that ever haunted the seven seas. Even the United States of America was among the powers of the world which paid annual tribute to the pirate rulers of Algiers to prevent the capture of American vessels and the selling of American citizens into captivity. At one time, Uncle Sam actually paid $400,000 tribute to Algiers. This ended abruptly when Commodore Peary came over with enough ships to adjust the matter permanently. But piracy persisted with its ebb and flow until France took charge of the country over a century ago. In the Casbah, we behold what is left of the palace fortress of the tyrants of the old Algerian pirate days, who claimed their share of the booty that each murderous seafarer brought home, whether it were plunder from sacked towns on European shores or weeping women from Italy, France, or Spain. Even today, we find in the Casbah characters who hearken back to the thrilling era of Algerian piracy. Come on, life isn't that bad. Stick your chin up. That's it. Now smile. Good. But we must admit that there isn't much in the Casbah to smile about. Sailing westward from Algiers, we drop anchor in the harbor of Casablanca, the largest city in Morocco, its population being over 450,000. It was founded by the Portuguese about 6 centuries ago, was captured by a Moroccan sultan in 1757, and ruled as an Arab stronghold until the early part of this century, when a war developed with France, which resulted in making Casablanca the principal city in the French protectorate of Morocco. So much for history. Now let us observe life as it is in Casablanca today. We are in the modern center of the city, where French influence has made a definite impression on the architecture as well as the traffic. The Institute of Physical Education is well founded, and the progress of spiritual development under the French regime is illustrated in the beautiful churches of Casablanca. Nevertheless, Morocco is fundamentally Arab as far as the majority of the inhabitants are concerned. Only in the larger cities, such as Casablanca, is there any noticeable portion of other peoples, and among them we find a conglomeration of Negroes, Jews, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and a scattering of British and Germans. The most notable event that has taken place here in recent years was the meeting between Winston Churchill and the late President Roosevelt. It was in this hotel that the famous leaders met, and it was in this house that Roosevelt resided while in Casablanca. Far from the madding crowd, we visit the lowly estate of a humble Arab family, which provides an interesting contrast with the European dwellings of Casablanca. The patriarch of the family approaches us a little timidly at first, but he soon succumbs to our presence and greets us cordially. Family life among the Arabs is bound with strong ties, and although most of the people live frugally, they appear to be reasonably contented in this part of the Arab world. We tried to get this youngster to leave his shady nook and join us, but he refused to budge. In fact, he answered our invitation with a horse laugh. After a brief visit with our Arab friend, we shake his hand in farewell and continue our journey northward, a distance of about 50 miles from Casablanca, and eventually arrive at Rabat, formerly a center of piracy, but now a residential town with a fairly large European population. Although Morocco is a French protectorate, it is governed theoretically by a sultan who resides at this palace in Rabat. The sultan's guards present a colorful front for the palace, even though military discipline doesn't appear to concern them nearly as much as the cigarettes we gave them. In the native market, we find a picturesque conglomeration of people and products, pungently flavored with an odoriferous atmosphere, which fortunately our cameras have never been able to photograph. It has been said that seeing is believing, but in our opinion, hearing and smelling are necessary to complete what we see. With the places go the faces, and here is one that doesn't look too friendly, but a smile is the same in all languages. Here may be purchased anything from live fish to rugs, leatherwork, brass articles, and French postcards. And here's the native bus, just in from heaven knows where, with a typical load of people and things. Generally speaking, the main roads in Morocco are in a fair state of repair, and they lead from Casablanca like spokes on a wheel to an orbit of cities, outstanding among which is Marrakesh, situated about 200 miles south of Casablanca. Here, too, the influence of the French is manifested in the architecture, but the native people still live their lives in apparent disregard of European manners and customs. In all of Morocco, there is no finer hotel than the Mamounia at Marrakesh, and it is here that visitors from the outside world usually gather. The gardens around the hotel are particularly colorful, and they provide an interesting contrast with the Arab world that is just over the garden wall. Returning to the native life in Marrakesh, we are soon rubbing shoulders with a bewildering mass of humanity that seems to be as far apart from us as we are from the moon. It is customary at the close of day for the local Arab population, along with thousands of Arabs from outlying districts, to gather in the main square for a grand reunion such as we see here. Every circle has its own attraction, including medicine men, jugglers, and fakers of every kind and description. The most popular circle appears to be the one in which the magician performs. How does he do it? Note that he shows the balls he seems to be taking from his mouth in the palm of his hand each time he does it, thereby creating a double illusion. All this, of course, provides unfading amusement for a gullible audience, from which the magician may occasionally receive a small gratuity by way of appreciation. And so life goes in this exotic part of the world, where Europeans and Arabs are engaging in an age-old struggle for human understanding. And it is here that we conclude our glimpses of Morocco and Algiers. This is Rome, the so-called Eternal City, where the historic Tiber peacefully winds its way, and the glory of yesterday forms a supporting background to the somewhat bewildering confusion of today. Rome itself contains enough treasures of art and history to occupy our time indefinitely, but we will content ourselves with only a few highlights, beginning with the Tiber River, which is perhaps the oldest moving thing in all of Italy. In the course of its meandering through the city, the Tiber flows under many historic bridges, not the least of which is the Ponte San Angelo, with its 10 statues of angels, leading to the castle of San Angelo, a Roman citadel since the 10th century. Here in the Piazza Venezia stands the monument to Victor Emmanuel II, where also is buried Italy's unknown soldier of the First World War. The Roman Forum was the heart of the mighty empire of the Caesars, as well as the source of an unrivaled system of jurisprudence, which has become the model of every modern nation. Even in ruins, the Forum of the ancient Romans is a fitting symbol of the glory that was Rome. In 312 AD, the Emperor Constantine was converted to Christianity, and that notable event was commemorated by this triumphal arch. The most colossal of all the Roman ruins is the great amphitheater, also known as the Colosseum, built 19 centuries ago by Jewish prisoners who were taken at the fall of Jerusalem during the reign of the Emperor Vespasian. In strange contrast to the Colosseum, where Christians were once thrown to roaring lions for the amusement of pagan Rome, is this world-renowned institution known as St. Peter's, where a Christian pope now holds spiritual dominion over all of Roman Catholic Christendom. The buildings on the right form the Vatican, in which the pope resides. Traveling over the road from Rome to Assisi, we pass through fertile valleys that are filled with the fragrances of spring. And along the road, we are particularly impressed by the famous white oxen of Tuscany, a special breed that flourishes in this part of Italy. Draft cattle of Tuscany are remarkable for their size, strength, and docility. They are much preferred to horses as farm animals, for when they have served their usefulness on the highways and in the fields, they may furnish roasts for the peasant's table. For centuries, the Italian farmers have planted the soil as they do today. And although more modern methods are being introduced, the transition does not appear to be very popular. And now we behold the picturesque old town of Assisi, made famous by a young man who came to be known as St. Francis of Assisi, founder of the Franciscan order. His mortal remains lie buried beneath this church, to which come devout pilgrims from all parts of the Roman Catholic world. Some historians claim that the life of St. Francis of Assisi came nearer to that of Jesus than any other Christian disciple. The town of Assisi itself is steeped in the memory of St. Francis, who was born here in 1182, the son of a rich merchant. Centuries before St. Francis, however, Assisi was a wealthy and important Roman colony. As in all the older towns of rural Italy, the public fountain is a popular meeting place where the gossip of the village is rampant. And all who do not show up are apt to be shown up. The shops of Assisi sell the homely wares of the countryside, and they naturally feature religious mementos of every kind and description. Devout pilgrims journey here from all parts of Europe. This one seems to be having a little difficulty with his camera. En route to the town of Pisa, we are fascinated again by the rustic beauty of the country. In the hills of Tuscany, the farmers plant trees in their fields to serve as living supports for grapevines. Above all, Tuscany is known for its vineyards, and the cultivation is done partly by the old-fashioned method of festooning the vines from tree to tree in this manner. The famous Chianti wine derives its name from this district. And now we come to one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. This famous freak of architecture was begun in 1173 AD and completed in 1350. It commenced to lean during construction, owing to clay in the soil, which gradually gave way on one side until it was 16 feet out of perpendicular. It is still sinking at a very slow rate. Galileo dropped objects from its leaning side and so evolved the law of the velocity of falling bodies. Vying with the Tower of Pisa is a famous landmark known as the Cathedral of Florence, dating back to the early part of the 15th century. The baptistry of this renowned cathedral is noted for its famous bronze doors, which Michelangelo declared to be fit for the gates of paradise. Each panel represents an event in the Old Testament. Ghiberti occupied himself for 27 years in the modeling of these doors, and for 5 centuries they have been a source of inspiration to generations of successive artists. Spanning the River Arno is the Ponte Vecchio, the oldest bridge in Florence, and it still provides safe passage for the city's traffic, although its ramparts were bombed during World War II. Under the cover of this old bridge once passed such illustrious immortals as Dante, Galileo, Petrarch, Cellini, Michelangelo, and countless other men of genius. And so goes the pageantry of Italy's immortal landmarks, which have been a source of inspiration to countless generations and continue to be a tribute to the creative genius of her famous artists whose names have emblazoned the pages of history. This is Buenos Aires, capital of Argentina and largest city in South America, where about 3 million inhabitants live, work, and play in an atmosphere of old world traditions and new world ideas. Plaza de República, in the heart of the city, commemorates the liberation of Argentina from Spain, and it is built upon a plot of ground under which parking facilities have been provided for over 5,000 motor cars. This is the Calle Florida, the most popular shopping street in the city. Although Buenos Aires is rated as the 9th largest city in the world, it still conducts its traffic the same as it did a half a century ago. In fact, the local policemen boast that theirs is the only metropolis in the world that can handle its traffic without the help of traffic lights. The tallest building in the city is known as the Edificio Kavanaugh. Buenos Aires is perhaps the most beautiful man-made metropolis on earth, as Mother Nature contributed very little toward it in the way of natural beauty. Among the great leaders of South America was San Jose de Martin, whose house in Buenos Aires is now one of the city's most honored landmarks. San Martin led the forces of freedom which eventually liberated Argentina, Chile, and Peru from the yoke of Spain. On the wall of the house in which he lived may be seen the historic plaques which commemorate his daring deeds and also glorify the memory of the valiant men who rallied to his leadership. When death drives through the streets of Buenos Aires, it is usually a regal and pompous affair in which flowers play a very colorful part. Although an occasional funeral like this momentarily slows the living tempo of the streets, life in its merriest moods never forsakes the city's public parks and playgrounds. This fantastic swimming pool, designed to accommodate 100,000 bathers, is claimed to be the largest of its kind in the world. The public parks of Buenos Aires provide many diversions, not the least of which is miniature sailboat racing, a sport that is taken very seriously by the participants. Vying with miniature sailboat racing are the amusing animal races staged by the children in Palermo Park. In unique contrast with this horseplay are the real horses at San Isidro. where the sport of kings is one of the country's major diversions. The progenitors of Argentina's famous horses were brought from Spain centuries ago and allowed to run wild on the rugged pampas, but their descendants run here today on beautifully cultivated turf. The tracks of San Isidro and Palermo are the leading race courses in the country, and both of them are controlled by the celebrated Jockey Club, around which revolves the more exclusive social life of Buenos Aires. In fact, all social life in Argentina is generally based upon club memberships, not the least of which are the yacht clubs at El Tigre, a popular resort a few miles from Buenos Aires. Gracing the banks of the chocolate-colored waters of the Tigre River are a number of elegantly designed buildings in which are housed the various yacht clubs of Buenos Aires. Aside from sporting life on the river, there is also a more serious traffic in which the business of the day goes on. This is a cattle boat transporting live beef to the rich pasture lands in the Paraná Basin. Here on a tiny fragment of the vast Argentine pampas, we behold something of life as it is in the hinterland of a country which may owe its very existence to beef. For if it were not for beef, it is doubtful that Argentina would be one of the world's foremost countries today. Perhaps there's no place in the world where one may buy good juicy steaks as inexpensively as in Argentina. Although beef is naturally the staff of life for this beef-ridden country, there is also a plentiful supply of fish, as witnessed at the picturesque little fishing villages that dot the ocean shores of Argentina. Business is conducted here on the private enterprise system, and all one has to do to get into it is to join the Fishermen's Guild, buy a boat, and go fishing. This is the famous resort known as Mar del Plata, about 250 miles from Buenos Aires, where legal gambling and bathing are the featured attractions. Vying with Mar del Plata in popularity is the mountain resort known as Bariloche, a few hours by airplane from Buenos Aires, where winter and summer commune with each other in settings of exquisite grandeur. Modern but rustic hotels may be found nestling snugly in the foothills of the Andes. In this peaceful atmosphere where all seems to be right with the world, we most reluctantly conclude our glimpses of Argentina.